hopefully everyone's expecting a panel on Gen AI and business transformation. That's what we're covering here today. So thank you. Amazing. My name is Joynes-Burgess. I have the pleasure of moderating this intimidatingly expert panel today. They're all very nice, I promise. Just very quickly, a bit of background on me. I'm here sort of wearing different hats. So I work at Burson, Global Communications Agency, with Allison, who's going to introduce herself shortly. I'm also lucky to be on the advisory board of the Oxford Generative AI Summit for the second year. So wearing those two hats and trying to complete my doctorate at the Oxford Internet Institute. So I will be bringing those different kind of ways of thinking to the questions today. Before we kind of go, I'm going to set out sort of what we're aiming to cover, but I'd like to first invite our panel to introduce themselves and talk a bit about their roles at the intersection between generative AI and business transformation, which is the focus of what we're going to talk about for the next kind of 45, 50 minutes. I'm going to make sure we leave plenty of time for questions at the end, so trying to keep 10 minutes for questions there. So amazing. I will go to Graham first.
Sure. Yes, hi, I'm Graham Gannon. I'm a director at Google. I've been there for 11 years now. My team actually builds internal tools and products for Google. So we actually implement systems and software that gets used across Google. I've been fortunate to get to work with all of the different product areas in the company, very cross-functionally. And what we do is we implement a lot of AI and machine learning platforms to help our teams work better. And some of that stuff I will be able to talk about today, as much as I'm able to, and is about the implementation of those platforms and products. Some of the lessons that we've been covering pre-Gen AI sort of hype. Well, I don't want to call it hype, I'm jumping ahead. Pre-Gen AI, but all about the AI systems that we have at Google. That's me.
Yeah, thanks, Graham. Hi, everyone. I'm David Rowlands. I'm at KPMG, and I'm our global head of AI. I've always wanted to do one of these press conference tables. And, so apologies for this sort of rather formal setup, but yeah, it's my job to enable KPMG with AI in the way that it serves its client, whether they are audit clients or tax clients or advisory clients where we're implementing AI into their environments, but also to transform KPMG in a world of AI.
Perfect. My name's Jeremy Basset. Also very pleased to be part of this. What is it, like a post-game debrief?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I'm a tech founder. Let's go with that. My goodness. As of January this year, I launched a company called Benji. We are an AI company which is automating B2B sales. And that came out of a business that I launched 7 years ago, which is a consultancy, where we grew very frustrated with sales. And that came off the back of 14 years of experience at Unilever, where I found a pain in the market and then solved that through my consultancy. So that's sort of a backwards journey of the last 15 years for me.
Brilliant. And I'm Allison. I'm the Chief Data and Intelligence Officer for EMEA for Burson. It's a mouthful of a title, but effectively means my role is to think about how we bring together the right talent and technology to solve our clients' challenges. I was fortunate enough to do a postgraduate diploma here at Oxford in AI a couple of years ago, and I know there's a couple of other alums in the audience, so it's always lovely to see everybody again.
Amazing. I guess also full disclosure, I'm also an advisor to Jeremy's business, so I'm going to make sure that I don't show my bias with my two colleagues over there and give plenty of space for Graham and David to share their expertise as well.
We're worried. We're getting worried.
We're getting, yes, yeah, a little bit.
Perfect. So I guess in terms of like the purpose of how we want to try and use the next 40 minutes or so is firstly to kind of broadly set out the scope of generative AI in relation to business transformation. And we want to move quite quick to move into some sort of specific example use cases. We also want to talk about some of the roles and functions that are driving AI adoption and how generative AI is kind of playing into business transformation. And because we have such an amazing range of expertise here, I want to give plenty of space for the panel to provide their sort of practical advice and then leave the space for you to have more specific questions in relation to your world. So that's kind of what we're aiming for this morning. I hope that's kind of what you're here for.
Five people get up and leave.
Yeah. Right, okay. So I'm going to move just to the first question to the panel here. I want to get a sense of how in your kind of businesses in your respective worlds you're seeing generative AI being adopted for the purposes of business transformation, what kind of forms that takes, whether that's thinking more like holistic adoption or more kind of point solutions. And I was going to take this question to you first, David, because I think you've probably got the broadest scope in terms of the role you're playing within KPMG. You may think of like 10, 15, so maybe if we think about the top 3 in terms of generative AI around that, that would be helpful.
And there's some great success stories out there that we can learn from. There's a lot of frustration, and I think the rest of the time we'll talk about how to overcome some of that. But if we can start with some success stories. So when we're working with clients, they're using AI in 3 broad ways, or maybe 3.5 by the time I've finished. But let me go through them. So the first one is around roles and individuals, and this is the quickest to get out there, and it's things like Copilot or a chat solution, and this is enhancing individuals, but largely in their existing paradigm, making them more efficient. And that's out there, and what we're finding is that that's a great way of getting experimentation going, and surprisingly, people are much more positive about that as an experience if you ask the workforce than you might have thought, because they like the idea that makes them less administrative and more value adding, and so that's working well. And then within this individuals and roles, then you advance from there into a spectrum between knowledge assistants and agents. And so the agents is probably a bit more further on, and so that's probably my 1.5. But here you've got this formula of AI sitting over curated and increasingly precious data sets. And that enables, on the spectrum, and I'll give you an example. So we've been putting that into a UK supermarket for customer interaction, and you put the knowledge assistant alongside a human as they're on a call, and it's giving them it's listening in to the call, it's looking at the transaction data, and it's recommending a next best action. So the person is much more efficient. The calls take 20% shorter amount of time, that's measured, and they tend to be higher quality and more polite. And then as you increase confidence, then you can allow this AI to reference policy database and transaction database and make decisions. And so we've built solutions where the AI decides, yes, we can give a refund for the bananas because the bananas were squashed against the milk when they were delivered. And so it goes to the back office, executes the refund, and in that sense, the AI has made the decision. It genuinely has agency, and that's why we talk about it. So that's type number 1. But we've long realised that when you organise people into operating models with process and technology, they become exponentially more valuable, and that's true for AI too. And so the second category is enterprise AI or AI-centric operating models. And here, why is this important? It's because it's quite hard to make point business cases work. And so what we've been doing with a set of clients is building AI into modular capability that you can reuse against multiple business cases. So for a big banking client, modules of AI capability that have solved 15 business cases from LIBOR processing through COVID claims, and it will actually review CCTV footage and then calculate and orchestrate how the ATM machines are cleaned by humans. So you're getting this operating model, and the business case starts to improve. And the third type of AI we're seeing is around AI over cognitive models. And here these tend to be sector specific, and these are mind-blowing business cases. We don't have loads of success stories here, but we were talking about a few downstairs, around healthcare diagnosis, or you get materials usage diagnosis and decarbonisation modelling, or we're building one that will do resource allocation in a complex environment like a hospital. Complex models that we've now got the tools to be able to solve some of those things, or in banks, credit risk modelling. And just so you can see the scale of the business case there, global banks will have 2,000 people writing credit risk policy, never mind doing the modelling. So when you see these are billion-dollar business cases, if we can get to that sort of solution. So as you go from left to right in my model, as I'm looking at it, the business case starts to improve.
Thank you, David. Just, I know you touched on sort of cognitive models there, and also the kind of conversations downstairs talking about generative AI around kind of content creation and creative. And this might be a moment to bring you in, Allison, to talk about the way that cognitive AI is playing this transformative role in our business, or in kind of from a communication standpoint.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I mean, I would probably take a step back first and just acknowledge that for communicators, and Burson, for those of you who don't know, us is a PR communications company. Generative AI was one of the first bits of technology that I think everybody just got, because it speaks to so much of what it is that our clients and our teams are asked to do, which is engage in text and content and production and research and measurement, ultimately. So there's this huge amount of excitement and engagement from the communications field. Obviously, what is different in this wave of digitalization is this isn't about adopting tools. It's about how it actually changes our workflows and embedding these technologies into how we work. So to the point that around cognitive AI, one of the things that we're seeing is where there's a huge focus on generative AI for efficiency in content production, for good reason. There's also a much more strategic role that we're observing for cognitive AI to play in predicting how audiences will behave, how they will respond to different messages, so the impact of messages on some of our critical stakeholders. And that's something that we've been delivering with a tool called Decipher that allows us to look at the kind of virality and believability of artifacts. So whether that's a piece of content or a message or an influencer, that piece is really interesting. I think the second kind of space is how brands are starting to leverage this technology to either better understand performance or better see around corners. For example, looking into fringe content on social platforms, there is a sort of hint of misinformation. I'm sure we'll get there over the next 2 days. But thinking about how we can see into those fringe channels, which are just impossible to capture with sort of general social listening platforms, or audio and video, which we also know is where a lot of the action happens. That is, again, where AI, not necessarily generative AI, although sometimes, really comes into play for communicators. And then the last one, obviously, is measurement, which the context is my background. So if you hear me talking a lot about measurement today, that's why. We've spent about the past 18 months building out an AI-enabled pipeline that allows us to use generative AI rather than for the production of content, for the analysis of PR content. So being able to see things like how a message is delivered in near real time. That's quite exciting for PR professionals who are used to having to wait a couple of weeks because it's something that has to be done by humans. And now we can really focus our consultants on the so what.
Thank you so much. I guess if we can then pivot from communications to sales and marketing, and I think that's, as your world grows, it's also Jeremy's world, maybe we start from a kind of startup mindset around sales and marketing, where you're seeing the role for generative AI in what you've been solving in your work.
Yeah, there's a huge opportunity here. I think the way we got to sales and marketing might be interesting though, because we all face different challenges. One of the simple things we did was a 2x2 where we just thought through what are the things that we hate doing and what's costing us a lot of money. And one of the big things that we hate doing is cold emails, reaching out to people on LinkedIn, having to follow up, all of that sort of stuff. And that very simple 2x2 got us to the problem. And we always say, the problem well defined is a problem half solved. And so from there you can start to think, well, okay, how do we physically work through that process of doing emails, LinkedIn outreach, all of that sort of stuff. And then how can we start to automate it? And so that's where we got to with Super Benji. There's a huge commercial case to this. Cost of acquisition sends many businesses broke, especially startups, but even big businesses are struggling with cost of acquisition. So anything we can do to slash cost of acquisition will transform the growth of businesses, whether that's startups, large established companies as well, and it will help business thrive. And so we're really passionate about what we're doing. I think there's still a long way to go in this space, but we're seeing huge traction. You know, if you solve a problem that people really need solving, then it's going to get traction. So that's what we're experiencing at the moment.
Thanks, Jeremy. And if we can pivot to a slightly different scale in terms of the sales and marketing kind of infrastructure and where you're embedding generative AI in the work that you're doing, Graham.
Yeah, you guys have covered off a lot of the good categories there. Within Google, we've been applying AI or machine learning for years, right? For optimization, for improving workflows. This is not new. We always kind of look at it from what are we trying to accomplish and why. If it's a workflow that needs to be optimized, then it's a machine learning thing. It's something that there's a relatively clear goal. There are ways to optimize that, which ultimately helps us save time. We're trying to assist people do their jobs. That frees up more time for them to do things that humans are good at rather than machines. That's always been the case. Generative AI kind of brought two things for our point of view that was most useful. One, from the sales side, was like sales assistance, so providing exactly as you mentioned, guidance for people on sales calls to make things faster, quicker, get information readily at your fingertips. Content creation, which there's a fair amount of in terms of creating and generating good quality content. But for me, the big interesting thing is style transfer or summarizing, which is looking at a giant corpus of unstructured data and being able to understand that. And that's been very, very interesting across the space. We use it across pretty much every part of Google. As a non-Google example, which I would give where it's quite cool, I was working with an NGO startup that actually deals with climate policy and laws. It's a very unstructured set of data sitting in PDFs and websites all around the world of information that's been created about like policies in different languages that will potentially impact environmental outcomes. What they did is build this system using the models now that you couldn't do 10 years ago, is taking all that together to summarize it, and bringing it together and looking for correlations and connections across that would not have been possible unless you had teams of humans combing through it. Yeah. And today you can put that entire corpus in, let the machine run on it, and pull that out. So that is a huge, not just a time saver because you're creating new workflows that didn't exist. You're having access to information that wasn't there before.
Yeah. I mean, sorry to jump
in.
No,
go for it, Dave.
But there is problems like that, the one you just described, that no amount of people can do it because you can't coordinate them at the scale required.
No, what one person knows, the other person doesn't.
Exactly,
yeah.
So they actually make it worse.
Yes, exactly.
So this is where you're getting new paradigms of resolution.
And that's what's most exciting is when you hit that human limit of knowledge and information sharing and coordination, headwinds as we call them, the amount of effort that scales non-linearly as you bring new people in, it's harder and harder and harder to connect and share information with everyone. This actually removes some of those barriers and lets people actually function better together. Yeah.
I think that's hopefully quite a useful segue into kind of the next area I wanted to drill into a bit more in terms of the impact of generative AI around data strategies and intelligence, and particularly around how you strike the balance between using AI to support strategic decision making and some of the ways that you've been talking about, like accessing some of that unstructured data, but also kind of keeping the human in the loop. So you've got this ability to critically appraise the recommendations that are coming from AI, and we know some of the challenges that can come within those recommendations. So how do you strike the balance between those areas? Maybe I'll come to you, Graham, just to follow up on that, and we can go down the line afterwards.
Sure, yeah. I mean, this has a big question where to start. So I think this came up a bit in the panel downstairs. I think what makes, first of all, this useful is bringing your own first-party data for your organization into the model. And I've seen this with a couple people that I've worked with outside of Google. They've come up with an interesting AI tool, and they're like, look, I'm just going to bring this and start adding it into my workflow. And it almost always fails because they're just bringing in something that's not tailored in any way for them and trying to sort of shoehorn in something additional rather than something that's supplementary to the way they actually run things. So step one is being clear about the data and what you're trying to do. The second step, of course, is like, what is the goal? What is the task you're trying to accomplish? And being very clear about what you're actually trying to get out of it, whether it's an optimization, an improvement, a supplementary workflow, whatever. That's kind of like where you need to go from like just building the starting point. Then, of course, is actually putting together the data. And like I said, the most interesting for me is structured data has always been a problem. It takes a lot of time and effort to put through structured data. There's often disagreements on how one should structure the data. There's usually not one objective answer. Taxonomies can be different for different people in different worlds, and neither are wrong. They're both correct from different worldviews. Generative AI has the ability to kind of allow that to both be true. So you can now end up in a situation where it's okay to have that be unstructured, it's okay to sit in documents, and you pull it all in together into one kind of location. So that's, maybe that's a starting point
Yeah,
to
that's
pass on.
great. Allison, maybe I could just bring you in here where, just in terms of the support that you're doing with clients around their data strategies and that kind of balance between this new world of generative AI-enabled data and where that sits with the kind of consultancy model.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thrilled, obviously, downstairs to hear people thinking about data strategy first. We've all probably seen that comic. Like, we need an AI strategy. So, no, you need a data strategy, and then we can talk about AI. I think there's a couple pieces of it. One is thinking through, and I'll speak kind of specifically to the comms environment. Comms teams have not necessarily been the first to digitize. So a lot of data, agency and client side, has often sat in silos. So how we can help clients to think about how can we bring those together into a unified view and then use these tools to allow, kind of as you're saying, that dynamic engagement with the content. And I'm entirely in agreement with you that a lot of this comes down to not just how can we implement a tool in a space, but how can we think about what is the problem we're trying to solve and what is the benefit to the user. And there's a really interesting article in the MIT Sloan Review, it was a couple of years ago, thinking about how you actually embed a lot of these technologies. And it's a fellow named Paul Leonardi, and he was talking about the need to move beyond just strategic inspiration. I think a lot of us are still there, right? We'll have someone who's quite senior in an organization come out and espouse the values of generative AI and how this is going to change the way that we work and what the business can do. What we often fail to articulate is the benefit to the end user, and by that I mean our employee base. How are we actually helping those people see why this is going to be better for the way that they work? And then secondly, how can we make sure that we're putting the right guardrails around the tools, not necessarily from a kind of risk perspective, but from an expectation management perspective. I think all of us have had people in our organizations try to apply, for example, a large language model to a task and said, oh, I can do it. It's like, well, you've not tried to do a thing that's technically feasible right now. Let's set the guardrails around those expectations. And if we can do that, then we can make sure that, success isn't just localized, and also, that teams don't fail to adopt technology because they don't believe in its potential.
Jeremy, can I just ask you around the solutions that you're providing for clients and where you're kind of using the generative AI approach to then support clients in their data strategy or their kind of understanding of that to demonstrate the ROI that you're talking about?
Yeah, this conversation is quite interesting for me because, to be honest, we don't really encourage clients to have much of a data strategy. In
Radical.
fact, yeah, so here we go. I mean, we started off by saying, bring your leads, your prospects to us, and we will find ways to re-engage them. And then we realized no one has leads and prospects. So then we said, well, give us one lead that you could give, that we could train our model on, and then we'll find you a bunch of other ones. And then people even struggled to find one lead. Believe it or not, these are salespeople. And so then we said, well, just tell us your email address and we'll find who you should be talking to and we'll find you leads as well. And I think the great thing about generative AI, which is vastly different to anything that we've seen in the past, is that you can take initiative. You can really start to say, okay, well, if we don't have that, we can get that for you. If you don't have that, we can get that for you. If you don't have that, we can get that for you. So we've got it back to literally drop your email in. We'll understand what your company does, who you're trying to sell to, who would be the prospects that you'd be trying to reach. We'll research them, we'll come up with a big idea for them, and then we'll craft all of that into an email. So you can sort of get around this whole need for data, I think, by being able to tap into a whole bunch of data that already exists, if we're prepared to take it. Yeah.
Can I build on that for 1 second?
Yeah,
Do you want
no,
to-
David, I think we
Drop the mic. Shall I walk up?
I think they're entirely consistent positions, actually. This is the amazing thing about AI. We can all be right on this point.
Yeah,
You were going to say.
that's what the AI
Everyone
says.
is happy.
No, I was going to say something similar, that both approaches are right. Actually, just an interesting data point around about data. It costs time and money to organizations to collect data, and this is something that when data strategies come up, people sort of completely forget. They kind of go in and saying, like, just get them to enter everything. Get our sales teams to put in every single piece of information. Get them to tag this, get them to do this. That's fine, because we need that data. And I would ask often, like, but why? What are you going to do with that data? Well, we're still working it out, or it's for measurement, or some sort of nondescript answer. And the thing is, there is a significant cost to people going and putting that information, to the point where we even spoke to sales teams at Google, and they were saying, this is just admin. We're not. It's not actually helping us. The CRM system is for leadership. It's not for us, which is not good. So there's a benefit to using sort of AI to actually help extract data out of those situations, or infer much of that data to be useful without having that cost. And I think when you talk about data strategy, people think that data has no value, no cost, nothing, and that's just not true. And that's something that needs to be discussed very clearly when you're thinking about the data strategy.
Yeah, I mean, you talked about human in the loop, so I'm going to go a bit narrow and on a human-centric view of this data problem. And I think, however you get hold of the data, I think we've been probably caught napping a little bit in most organisations over data and the attention that we've paid to it over the years. And we've started to think more carefully about that. And we've got a pyramid, and it starts at data at the bottom. The next layer up is insight. The third layer is knowledge, and the top is wisdom. And I don't know what the whole pyramid's called, actually. Any suggestions are all welcome. But it's interesting, and I encourage you in your own organisation to think about how you would define each of those four layers in your worlds. And in ours, of course, we've got a load of knowledge workers. That's our business. 275,000 experts in their fields, whatever it is, in a Big Four organisation. And so, we've got lots of data, but it's all over the place. Where is it? Who owns it legally or practically? Where are we storing it? How are we keeping it up to date? How do we know it's trusted? Should we be aggregating it before we use it? Big questions like this that we're now going to have to crunch through. And then where our business needs to be very, very careful is probably in this layer of knowledge. Because AI is capable of starting to manage and process that. And if you think about knowledge in your organisation, it's probably coagulating around certain factors in your organisation, right? Either closest to the customer or closest to, in our case, closest to where the tax code sits, and you're a specialist in that tax code. And so you might be in Bermuda. Oh, hang on a minute, the client's over here in New York. So if we can crack that problem, we're gonna really service our clients a lot better. And so we're using an approach called reinforcement learning, where we're putting a set of real experts through a pretty turgid process, actually, of clarifying whether that knowledge is valuable or not, and if it isn't, what would you write the knowledge as? How would you describe the knowledge? And then after that, you can go into more iterative upticks and downticks, and we're going to start to curate this global knowledge database that we've never had before. So that's a human-centric kind of thing for us as a way of answering the data question.
I think I also wanted to think, as we're going into these sort of strategies for successful AI implementation, and we can often think about some of the technical skills involved, but I'd love to get your perspectives on what kind of cross-disciplinary, interdisciplinary expertise that we need to effectively implement generative AI for this business transformation purposes. And I guess a related question is, like, what kind of roles or functions are driving AI adoption in your respective worlds? And I'm aware that we've left Allison quiet for a while, so I'm going to bring you in, Allison, if that's okay.
So I think if you kind of buy my premise that the kind of AI wave is a shift away from tool adoption to kind of workflow management, the next question then is, how do you organize around that principle? Oxford, the sales school specifically, have identified 4 critical components when it comes to sort of organizational readiness for AI. Some of you have heard these before. Each speaks to a key pillar into how a business is able to make use of the technology, kind of starting with people, particularly senior stakeholders, but moving all the way through into governance and policy. So first, thinking about your constituents. So how can we make sure that, particularly at the senior end of our business, people understand what AI is, specific to the problem we're trying to solve, how it's going to be applied, and what the ROI is. And that's important for senior leadership because that is how you get buy-in, and we all know that if you don't have senior leadership buy-in, a project is going to fail just right at the start. But of course, you have to communicate that all across the organization, to my point earlier, because otherwise we get these sort of lopsided adoptions, or you see organizational resistance, which is a really interesting phenomenon to watch in real time. Then we think about capabilities. So to your point, do we have those technical skill sets that are required? I think when I look at the agency landscape, a lot of us will find that our comms teams don't have access to the required new team members. We're very unlikely to have engineers or data scientists embedded within the comms function. And one thing I hear a lot from comms teams is, we have brilliant data scientists, but I can't access them. Or we're at the bottom of, yeah, there we go, that's the sound. So how do we make sure that you have people embedded within a function so that you can make use of these technologies? And if you do bring them in, how do you make sure that their presence is meaningful? Because it's really easy to bring in folks with engineering backgrounds and then have them bounce out of an organization because the culture isn't there, because they don't kind of fit, quote unquote. It's also obviously about the broader team. So how do we think about upskilling? How do we manage training and sort of knowledge in the broader sense? Then culture, which is a phenomenal question that I've spent ages on, but I won't. Oxford looks at it in kind of two ways. The first is, how accustomed to data-led decision-making is your organization? Which again, for the comms folks in the room, is an interesting question. And second, what is the appetite for innovation, risk, and failure? Because it's, I think on that second point, in particular, as I've been speaking to folks around EMEA over the past year, that agencies and communication professionals often find is a big stumbling block. So our appetite for risk, we're all in a risk management, reputation management role. So actually our appetite for failure can be really low. And then finally, compliance. So how do we make sure that we're thinking about AI from all of these perspectives? And there's some phenomenal talks about this later today, I think. Legal, regulatory, ethical considerations. How can we make sure that our organizations have the right governance in place to support? I think if we have those four things, if you can show that at least you're making progress on those, then you're in a good place. Otherwise, perhaps it's time to take a step back and think about what it is that you need to fix before you move forward.
Jeremy, can I ask you just like a sort of lean answer on that then? If you're in sort of startup mode and the kind of range of roles and functions are more limited and you're kind of being agile around that, how have you approached that, or how would you recommend people in the sort of startup mode approach the roles around Gen AI integration or adoption?
Yeah, well, I think to Allison's point, AI belongs everywhere. It's not a function, it's pervasive. And therefore, I mean, the way we manage it within our team is every week we're trying to automate what we did last week, and effectively make ourselves redundant week on week. So that's the big challenge for each of my team members. I know from my Unilever days, there are different ways of driving change. When we had sustainability as a big topic, we set up a sustainability department, and that really drove change across the organization. When it came to diversity and inclusion, that was something that was a small central team, but very much drove change right across the organization, and that was everyone's responsibility. I think AI is more like the D&I that rather than the sustainability, in terms of this is not a big function that you need to build. This is perhaps a small central capability that empowers, encourages, and inspires the whole organization to drive this change. Because, like Allison mentioned, AI belongs everywhere, and I think our job as leaders is to help equip people to embrace that in whatever role they're in.
David, do you have thoughts on that in terms of some of the larger scale businesses that you're working with?
Yeah, I start on the positive. The Hype has done an amazing job of making technology-led transformation accessible to business leaders, who never really understood it before. I think there's something human about it that has allowed them to click into it, and therefore, we surveyed 1,800 board-level execs, supervisory board-level execs, and all 1,800 of them were supervising an AI program and were having a governance review over their own AI. So like out of 1,800, not one was not. And so, you know, that I think that means that everyone's at it, and you know, people are definitely, you know, it's an agenda item. But at the same time, there's lots of frustration. I mean, I think I was looking around, it's a very resilient and cheerful bunch actually here today, but actually I'm hearing a lot of execs that are very frustrated about where it is at the moment. And I think the hype sort of promised a magic wand. In actual fact, some of the old fundamentals that we've always known about transforming through an operating model against a strategy, you know, people, processes and technology, it's a tool, do we understand what the purpose is, and then clicking down into data. I think these are the really important things. I think we've touched on it's everything everywhere all of the time. So if you want to do this properly, it's an enterprise-wide transformation. Leaders of that kind of program are not available. They're doing something useful at the moment, right? I was doing something useful, and I was dragged out of that to do this. I think people have to be a bit bold with this and go for a broad, all-inclusive program. And then people are getting stuck on 5 broad issues. It's quite hard to make the business case work. I was majoring on that in my first question. Data we've covered. Oftentimes just getting the right technology foundations, cyber security, even a cloud environment that you can scale up. Doing it in a trusted way. So, you know, there are a set of capabilities you need to master if you're going to be trusted in the use of your AI. And again, I'm just going to come back to people, taking people with you on a journey, you know, giving them the right skills, keeping that covenant of trust with your workforce is massively important. So there's some blocking and tackling that we need to go through in order to get to these ROIs.
Can I just build on something David said? So while I 100% agree that, you know, this belongs everywhere, as we've already talked about, the problem with organisation-wide transformation programs is that they often never go anywhere. I know at Unilever, one of the things we used to do is if we didn't like a project, we'd make it so big that we couldn't move it forward. And so what I would encourage you to do is do think big, but in the startup spirit, like think small, move fast. Like you don't have to automate everything all at once. You do have to perhaps empower someone to automate one part of their role and to then start to expand from there. So yeah, I do think big, but yeah, start small.
Think big, start small. You can do both.
Yeah, you can do both. Yeah. Exactly.
I can see Graham nodding vigorously there when you're speaking, Jeremy. So would you like to come in with a kind of the approach from a Google standpoint, and love to know what sort of expertise I imagine AI is kind of across everything as we've just been talking about, but what kind of expertise are you kind of really leaning into or looking into the future around?
Yeah, there's 2 parts of that. So much has been said, so I'll try not to duplicate anything. Starting with the skills side, so I have an engineering team and product team. We make it a key part to be very up-to-date and process everything about AI, learn about it, go deep in the models, go into the mathematics. That's not necessarily appropriate for everyone, but Google as a company has made it part of like effectively the curriculum for everybody across the company to learn about AI, not just about our products, but to learn what AI does, cannot do, where it currently is, about the ethics of it. And that's something that, as from a training and development standpoint, it should be everywhere. And so I'm backing up the point that AI is not a function or a team necessarily. It's something that needs to be part of everything. I think that's a very easy step to encourage people to get out there and learn right away. And it should be something that everyone has at least some base knowledge of. I mean, it's like once upon a time you used to put Microsoft Word on your CV. Like if we're going to, I know, can you believe it? Oh, maybe I'm showing slightly my age on that one. Nowadays, you know, you might say, well, I have AI. That doesn't really mean anything anymore. But eventually this will just become part of like the curriculum, like anything else that you just expected to have a base knowledge of it over time. But we're not there yet. Going back to just some of the stuff building on, you know, how this works in terms of implementation. The main thing I heard from you was just, this is like, I was thinking in my head, take the word AI out, and this is true of everything. In any sort of organizational change. Yeah. What you talked about was about, you know, the people, the technology, the process, the change management. It's going to take time to go through that. Yeah. It's not something that happens right away. When anyone is asked to change the way they work, people love change, but they don't like to change. That is true of everyone. So you have to help and guide people, bring them along. Another thing with AI in its current form is we are into the hype cycle, I think, is pretty fair to say. There's still the uncanny valley in front of us that we keep hitting, and if anyone isn't aware, that's when things are not delivering as expected, and it's quite either creepy or disturbing or strange, and it's not always easy for the AI model to explain why it has made a decision. If David does something strange, like drops a cup off of a balcony, I can ask him, why did you do that? And I can get an interesting, I may not disagree with it, but I can get an answer. It's not quite yet at that point of explainability in terms of AI implementation.
Well, you also get the self-driving car phenomenon where you know, a human might knock the cup off the balcony like 10% of the time,
yes,
and we're okay with it. But
yeah.
if the AI metaphorically does that once,
yes,
then we have a problem, right?
Yeah.
So we've got more explaining to do.
Yeah, and so there's much more, there's different expectations, and I think being clear about setting those expectations early on about what the technology can and cannot do is there. And then the last piece I was going to say is all of this goes back to the point that I think has been made over and over, but I'll make it quickly. You have to understand what you're trying to accomplish, and you have to have the knowledge to know what people do in their day-to-day. If you're going to improve someone's workflow, you have to go deep and understand that. And what I have seen across organization after organization is people in little silos who say, I'm going to go fix contracting. Contracting never happens on its own. There are whole loads of teams beforehand and afterwards that sign deals, that negotiate, that create contracts, that do all these things. You have to look at this end to end, and that's a product design issue, not an AI issue.
I think we've already started delving into the practical advice, which is the kind of final area I wanted to go into before opening up to questions. But perhaps I'll come to you, Allison, in terms of advice that you'd be giving to, from a communications lens to businesses looking to either get started with using generative AI or optimizing that, and how you do so to maximize the benefits and avoid some of the pitfalls.
I mean, I think the first point is exactly what you just made. How do we break down workflows and really understand what it is that people are doing? I thought it was really a fascinating perspective from Caroline a bit earlier today. The idea that sometimes it's not just about how are you doing it now, it's how might you do it. And maybe starting from that perspective, which I just love, I'm going to take that and run with it. Because I do think we spend a lot of time just trying to throw things in and seeing if it works, rather than really saying, if we're going to do this, can we spend the time to do it properly? And that comes back to the importance of data structure and data strategy, and you and I will have a conversation about that.
A stern one.
And again, perhaps because of my measurement background, I think more generally, a lot of this is just going to come down from the beginning, articulating what is it that we're trying to do, what does that look like, and then how can we communicate that down the chain? How can we make sure that our employees understand why this is benefit to them and not just to the business? How can we make sure that we're not just chasing efficiencies, because efficiencies have a flaw? You can only make a system so efficient before it's just rigid and it will break, versus when we think about opportunities, there's not a ceiling there. So how can we balance, the focus across those two pieces? And then I think the final piece is just thinking back to those 4 C's. Can you make sure that you have the right people in your organization who are going to support you? Have you considered how you will deal with blockers? Have you thought about bringing in the right talent and upskilling the people that you have so that they can actually take advantage? Have you got the culture right? And if you don't, what can you do to fix it? And then how do you make sure you have that governance? Because actually I think a lot of folks are finding they've jumped in because it's exciting and because people across all levels of the organization were already starting to use it. So organizations have had to move quickly and are now finding actually that's where the rubber maybe meets the road, is can you make sure that you've got the governance process in place to support people as they experiment safely?
That's good advice.
Who else wants to give some advice?
What I would say in terms of getting started here is really don't think about how do you apply generative AI. Think about the problem. What are you trying to solve? And really dwell on that. I think that's the key. There's a good chance there's probably already a solution to that problem. So once you've identified the problem, start to look, well, what already exists out there that solves for this? And then the third thing is start to play around with those tools. Of course, if they don't exist, then start to build solutions. That last point, I would say there's never been a better time to start to build your own solutions. It's really easy. I don't have any technical experience. I'm not a developer at all. but I founded a tech startup. And in fact, we built it all in-house, and none of my team are developers either. So you don't need like 300K AI specialists to come on board to get started here. You can really get going. There's a whole bunch of great solutions out there, no-code, low-code solutions that make it very easy for anyone like you or I to get involved. So that would be my last encouragement. Start to play around with this stuff and look at how you can solve those problems as well.
David, or Graham? Yeah.
You always go last.
No,
Oh, sorry.
well, I'll leave the best for last then. Which I meant.
Well, okay,
no, I'm
it's
just
me,
kidding. I'm
so-
sorry. As a piece of advice I gave my team, I said, if you have an idea that you want to get through, a project that you want to get done at a company, just add the word AI to the title. Done. Doesn't matter what it is, you can get it through. Yeah. In terms of practical applications, I think we talked a lot about the goals already and what you want to achieve. The other thing is play around and get to know it all. I talked a lot about unstructured data earlier on, and we all have. There's a tool that Google created called Notebook LM. If anyone has not had a chance to play with it, I highly recommend it. It's a great where you can upload documents and whatever corpus of text, and then you can start summarizing, generating things off the back of it. That's today you can use. My favorite things is like when I speak to people, even in this conference, they're like, oh, I put the agenda into Notebook LM and told it, or whatever, and said, what do I need to do? Or Chat GPT told me the summary of everything in the emails. Those are the applications that I like hearing about because I'm seeing people actually using these things day to day, not somebody just sitting there and going, I was able to generate a picture of a dog wearing a donut. Can we please make that part of our company? And that's the conversations which you think, okay, that's cool, well done, but now what? So try and use it yourself and get excited about it.
Yeah, Allison talks about about the people being people-centric, and of course, when you're in a startup, people are everything. Yeah, I loved hearing about the curriculum that Google have, and so one of the points I was going to make is be human-centric in your use of AI. And so our curriculum, I had on the 24th of January 2024, we did 24 hours of AI, and then we've repeated it every other month since. And the point of that was to make a symbolic comment that AI is for everyone. It's for all of our geographies, it's for all of our people, all of our levels, all of our functions, and we want people to be included in the use of it. And one of our principles of trusted AI is fairness. And so we want society, we're throwing it up in the air. When it lands again, I want it to be fairer than it was before, at least. So I think having a focus on that is important. And then the experimentation, I think we'd all experiment as individuals. I think we're going to have to push through that and then beyond. And so, big execs are getting frustrated with that move from experimentation to business case scale. And what I'm advocating at the moment, we're doing it ourselves, is take a ring-fenced bit of your business and go all in. Because people don't, while there's a route back, people don't think through the whole problem, right? So an example in our area is for, transfer pricing in our tax business. We're going to do it. We're going to transform it. And instead of saying to a client, are you okay if we co-collaborate on that? That sounds innovative, it sounds fun, but there's always a way out if it fails, So what we're saying here is you've got to convince all of your clients to come on to our new AI-enabled solution. And if you can't convince them, they'll go to PwC or EY, God forbid, right? And so that's real hazard. So if you put real hazard into your experimentation, what we're finding is you go on the full emotional journey and then you round, like no one had thought through price. How are you going to price it? How are we going to capture that value? How are we going to articulate that? What's the shape of the pyramid team then in that new world? And where are they going to be? So you start to really drive through what real change is going to look at like. So experimentation starts. I think we've done the fun bit, to be honest. We've the hard bits are yet to go, and I think having that real hazard is a good way of flipping into that new phase.
Thanks so much. I think we're literally in good time now to open up to questions. I know we've covered a lot of ground. I can see a hand up already over there. Ryan, I think did you have a microphone for us? Yeah, sure.
Here.
Yeah, just
Thank you. Hello, I'm John Thornhill. I'm a tech columnist at the Financial Times. Very interesting discussion, and very interesting to hear about the imaginative use cases of AI. But I talk to a lot of businesses, and they have a less positive story to tell about using generative AI, or you could argue a more positive case in a different way. But as you've explained, you can either use generative AI to grow the top line or to improve the bottom line. And most British companies, at least, are using it for the latter, I suspect, rather than the former, because the CFO tends to have more authority institutionally in British businesses than the CRO. So it's a lot easier to make the case for cutting costs, losing people, improving the bottom line, than it is to take risks, use your imagination, invest money in building the top line. So how do you persuade your own employees that the upside is going to be greater than the downside? Because some of the companies on the panel today, in your businesses, you are also losing employees in quite a big scale and slashing graduate recruitment.
Do you have a particular panelist, or whoever wants
Anyone?
to take it? Or I can pick on someone.
I think it's a great question. I love that quote, AI won't replace humans. Humans who use AI will replace humans who don't. And so I think our job is to sort of equip and enable everyone to be able to embrace this technology. That's definitely the way it plays out in our very small organization as a startup, in terms of those people who are able to effectively make themselves redundant and move on to the next big thing are the most valuable employees that we have in the team. And I'm not sure how that plays out in a much larger organization.
Well, I agree with two things. One is that we're in the frustration part of the cycle, and I've tried to give some really practical ways through that, and that's definitely what we're doing with our clients at the moment. Because I don't think we'd have had the frustration if people hadn't thought it was a magic wand in the first place. But every technology has sort it's a familiar hype cycle. You kind of hope that it's going to be, and it isn't. And so then we work through the difficult things. And then the second thing, but I think there will be 2 or 3 years to run on that before we solve some of those big problems, like the ones I've been going through in terms of data and structuring a transformation program, taking employees on and building the good corporate governance over programs. Those take time. And then the second thing I agree with is that it's been tempting to start with efficiency. And so I would say, again, that will change over time. I think short term, we've overhyped its impact in the short term. Medium to long term, I think we're underestimating its impact on business models and therefore on growth.
Shall we go for another question? I think there's a hand up on this side.
So I'd love to reference the self-driving car and the failure states in high-risk situations, and I was wondering if you could speak about how you think about evaluations, especially and graceful failure of those failure states, especially when it comes to things like LLM as judge, or how you systematize that so that you can capture the knowledge work processes in that flow when you fail. So in the example of a car, if a car fails in some way, we have expert drivers have way to deal with this and to resolve the situation, and in AI systems, handling the failure state when something goes catastrophically wrong is.
Do you want to start?
Yeah, if I could try. I'd love to take that one. Yeah, well, look, it really depends. I personally don't work on self-driving cars or anything with a failure rate where it's so significant. I don't personally have to deal with that. Mostly what we're talking about is, like I said, the uncanny valley issue where the answers that come up are not as expected. I talk a lot about people saying, we're trying to reduce the amount of hallucinations. This is the word everyone says. That's not correct. The whole idea of generative AI is to hallucinate. Yes. It is creating something from nothing. It is creating something that did not exist before, therefore it is hallucinating. What you're trying to get to is closer to an expected answer or an expected outcome for that person. And as I mentioned prior, things like taxonomies, the way you might view the world, the way you structure your thinking, differs from person to person, and they are different for each of us. So there's not always necessarily an objective truth. And sometimes there is 2 + 2 should equal 4. And most scenarios, and unless you read Orwell, then fine, maybe not. Well, one person laughed at that Orwell joke, good. So I would say that from us handling that, there's two big things for me. It's about making sure it's transparent to the user and very clear about why something has then been, first of all, that it is AI, that something was used there. The second thing is that there is some sort of explanation of how you got to that conclusion or some sort of background. Again, if you look at Notebook LM, I really like how they just recently added the ability to click on supertext, or you can click on like references of where that specific piece of information or summary came from, and it will jump you to your corpus of text to where it actually got that. Those kind of things help with the explainability. And then the last thing again is like being very clear again about the expectations up front, providing feedback mechanisms for people to be able to allow the failure. And at the end of the day, there are always going to be failures in any system. There's failure when I was building software 20 years ago. It's not any different now. It's just about expectation management. Again, I don't make self-driving cars, so slightly different at that level.
Yeah, I think I'd build on that with another non-self-driving car example and just say, you know, when we think about the AI pipeline I was talking about before and using large language models to track messaging in coverage, a lot of the conversation in any automation scheme really is what is the benefit and what are the drawbacks? Because when we automate, and particularly when we're looking at something like deploying an LLM, first of all, it means you have less control in some ways. So you have to understand that it's not something where you can go in and say, well, I disagree with that at scale, because then you lose the efficiency that you're gaining in the pipeline. So how can we have a really honest and upfront conversation with clients around, if we deploy an LLM here, here's what that will look like, here's what the error rate, the expected accuracy and fidelity, and here's the controls we have in the system to make sure that a human is in the loop and checking that. And if you talk with that client and they say, yeah, that's just not good enough, I need it to be 99% accurate, then the reality is that you can't use that tool for that process, and actually maybe that is where reinforcement learning, or you could use an ML where you have a lot more control around X equals Y, just as an example. So there's different ways that you can start to approach that from the outset to make sure that everyone is aligned.
We talk a lot about artificial intelligence, but we probably should talk more about artificial stupidity, because it is real. It happens. I think it depends on the stake. So for instance, we've got some clients who they're quite happy with a 95% success rate in terms of the messages that are going out are on brand and on point, and then they realize that sometimes mistakes will happen, and they'll deal with that when they get there. Morgan Stanley can't deal with that sort of a risk. So what we do for them is we write the messages, but then they review every message before it goes out. So you can do hybrid approaches. I don't think it's an all or nothing approach. I think you can automate big parts of your work, but keep manual checks in place where you've got high stakes involved as well. So.
David, I think when we spoke before today, thinking about the panel, you mentioned around some use cases of where AI is being deployed to solve some of the problems it creates. Maybe this might be a good opportunity to kind of talk about that. Do you recall that? Maybe it was around like data cleanup or.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've sort of covered it in that discussion there, which is some of the traditional ways in which we've worried about where the data is and how to analyze it. You can use AI to take some of the risk out of those. So, as an example, any auditors in the room will know that the method has historically for hundreds of years been based on a sample basis, and now you take a representative sample size, but now you can run AI over the entire transaction set and use a set of diagnostic type characteristics, just like we were talking about downstairs on cancer detection, to find fraudulent transactions. And then you can, if you're looking at the whole data set, actually your confidence in the data and the conclusions you're drawing are probably better than they were before.
Thank you. Do we have other questions?
We should have the last one, please.
We have time for this last one?
Yeah, quickly.
Perfect. Thank you.
Hello, thank you for your presentation today. It's wonderful. I am an AI specialist, computer scientist, and also an executive MBA. I'm quite fascinated about business transformation and how AI can help. I was wondering to what extent companies think about this strategically, really, like a data strategy involving all your functions in your organization, leveraging AI or not, but bringing it to a consensus. Are they ever working with this?
A question to particular panels? Or?
No, I think anybody can handle it.
So is the question, are enterprises looking enterprise-wide at the problem?
Enterprise-wide looking at an AI.
For sure, and then they're working through structured versus unstructured, and where is it, like I was describing earlier, where is it located, who owns it, who has the IP, how do we protect it, how do we store it, how do we renew it, and
how do you connect it to the end strategic objective?
Exactly. What's it for? So again, starting small is not a bad idea. So if you start, which is why I said your model is consistent, because what you were saying is it wasn't that you didn't have an AI strategy. You made it very, very precise to the business case usage that you were talking about. And so if you do that multiple times and then spot the thematics and the scale and the reuse, then you start to get both sides of the problem going at once. So I mean I said earlier, I think we've underinvested in it. I'm guessing, as a data scientist, you would probably agree with me. And I can tell you that if I give you the situation that has the highest ROI of any of the clients that I've worked with, the chief AI officer also took on the title of chief data officer. And that person had a dual role, and he insisted that he would have to have both. And he describes the program as 90% data, 10% AI.
Thank you.
Okay, I think that's all we have time for, but everyone will be milling around, so thank you so much, everyone. Thank you all.